It was supposed to be a normal Thursday morning at Dallas-Fort Worth. Families hurried through terminal gates, clutching snacks and boarding passes, their minds on holiday destinations and long-overdue reunions. But for one black family, Marcus, and Denise Holloway and their 8-year-old son Caleb, it became a day they'd never forget. They stood near gate B-17, travel documents in hand, early and prepared. Denise held onto Caleb's tiny hand, while Marcus tried to ease his son's nerves about flying. But when the gate opened and passengers began boarding, the attendant's eyes fixed coldly on them. Others were waved through. The Holloways were told to stand aside. No reason given, no explanation offered. Confused and quietly humiliated, Marcus asked why. The answer was as chilling as it was cruel. We're prioritizing passengers with appropriate status. When asked what that meant, the flight attendant turned away. 2 rows down, Jason Statham, traveling under the radar on a connecting flight, noticed the commotion. He'd seen that look before, the quiet dread of a family just trying to be treated like everyone else. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to step forward with a threat. He just pulled out his phone, made a single call, and said 6 quiet words. "This is Statham, stop that flight." The gate attendant didn't know what hit her. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever witnessed someone step in when things weren't right. This story will remind you that justice, when done right, doesn't need to shout. Marcus Holloway had built his life around one simple principle: respect. He wasn't a loud man, nor did he seek conflict. He'd served 16 years in logistics for the U.S. Navy, and when he came home to Fort Worth, Texas, he opened a small automotive business, Holloway Auto and Repair. Known for his quiet integrity, Marcus raised his family with that same foundation: dignity over noise and grace over outrage. His wife, Denise, worked as a school administrator, steady, smart. She managed tough conversations with calm strength and taught Caleb, their only child, that kindness mattered even when the world forgot it. This trip had been a long time coming, Caleb's first visit to Disneyland, something they'd saved for nearly 3 years. Jason Statham, meanwhile, was passing through Texas for reasons few knew. He wasn't filming, he wasn't working, he was flying low, visiting an old friend from his military past who was struggling through chemotherapy. Jason didn't crave the spotlight. He was the kind of man who showed up quietly and left only after making something better. Their lives should never have intersected, but prejudice has a way of unearthing people's true selves. The Holloways had done everything right, early. Check-in, full documentation, polite demeanor. But to one gate attendant with a subtle sneer and a hidden bias, they weren't just passengers. They were a problem, an inconvenience. And that morning, as the line moved forward and they were held back like outliers, Marcus didn't want trouble. He just wanted fairness. The kind of fairness that should come standard, but too often doesn't. But in the shadows stood a man who'd seen too many moments like this. Jason didn't need to be involved, but justice to him wasn't optional. It was instinct. Flight 283 to Los Angeles was fully booked, mostly with families. The summer air buzzed with anticipation. Children tugging at parents' sleeves, couples planning beach days. And amid the sea of passengers, Marcus felt a growing unease. He'd traveled before, but something about the gate attendant's body language chilled him. The attendant, a woman in her late 30s with a clipped tone and eyes that skipped over them like they weren't there, had started off polite, but distant. When Marcus approached to clarify their boarding group, she brushed it off with a line that didn't sit right. "There are complications with your documentation." He checked again. Everything was in order. IDs, boarding passes, confirmation, emails. Jason sat just far enough away to avoid suspicion, but close enough to hear the rising tension. He recognized the pattern. Not loud, not blatant, but a slow, dehumanizing deflection used to make people feel small. It was the kind of bias that hides behind bureaucracy. Jason's military training taught him to observe before reacting. His mind scanned possibilities, overbooking, computer errors, legitimate confusion. But none of that applied. The family was clearly targeted. Others were breezing through without a second glance. He noticed the tremble in Caleb's hand as he clutched his mother's coat. Denise remained calm but tense. Marcus, clearly holding back his frustration, glanced once at his son, then took a breath. Jason leaned forward. This wasn't about seats. It was about message. He made a quiet call, not to the airline, not to airport, security, but to someone whose influence stretched deeper. Someone who didn't ask questions when Jason Statham's voice came through the line. All he said was, "They need to board. Fix it." In 2 minutes, the plane's doors were locked, and a silence fell across Gate B-17. The flight had been delayed. Officially, the announcement blamed boarding complications. Passengers murmured, glancing around, growing impatient. But Jason had already set the wheels in motion behind the scenes. His call hadn't been to a supervisor. It had been to the airline's executive security liaison, a man who owed Jason a quiet favor from years ago. At Gate B-17, the mood shifted. The attendant, whose name tag read M. Dorsey, grew tense as she tapped furiously at her tablet. She looked up, eyes scanning the terminal, suddenly uncertain. She knew something was happening, but not what. Marcus turned to Denise, whispering low, "This doesn't feel right." He wasn't just talking about the delay. He'd served long enough to recognize when pressure was building beneath the surface. Jason remained in his seat, still unnoticed, calm, watching. Then, 2 figures emerged. From the secure corridor behind the boarding gate, one in a dark suit, the other in airline administration uniform. They didn't say a word at first. They simply approached the gate agent and requested a private conversation. Passengers noticed. The hush, the tension. The ones who'd already boarded were asked to return to the gate. Confusion spread. Caleb, still holding his mother's hand, whispered, "Are we not going to Disneyland?" Denise knelt down. "We are, baby. Just might be a little late." But Jason knew better. The flight wasn't going anywhere, not until what happened was acknowledged and made right. Gate Agent Dorsey returned, her face pale, her words clipped as she called the Holloways forward. "There's been a misunderstanding. Please prepare to board." But it was too late for quiet corrections. The truth was out. People were watching. And the moment of silence that followed was heavier than words. The family stood frozen, until Marcus stepped forward and said, "Not until you say why." The crowd at the gate held their breath. The Holloways weren't making a scene, but they weren't moving either. Marcus's voice was steady, not raised. Denise's eyes stayed on the gate agent, waiting. And little Caleb, sensing the tension, squeezed both their hands tighter. Jason stood now, arms crossed, silent but present. Gate Agent Dorsey hesitated. This wasn't part of the training. She'd made a judgment, one she thought would go unnoticed, buried beneath airline protocol and tight schedules. But now the question hung in the air like a courtroom verdict. Why were they denied boarding in the first place? The woman from airline administration, a sharp-eyed Latina named Frances Morales, stepped forward. "Mr. Holloway, I'm deeply sorry for what's happened. We're reviewing the gate interactions now." Marcus didn't blink. "That's not an answer." Frances took a breath, then said it plainly and publicly. "It appears your family was selectively delayed. We're taking immediate action." Passengers began murmuring. Some looked ashamed. Others nodded. Jason remained off to the side. This wasn't about him. It was about them. About making sure people like the Holloways never had to question their place in the line again. Denise's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. She stood taller, and then something happened no one expected. A mother near the back stepped forward, her own son beside her. "I saw it too. They were here before us. We just walked through." One by one, other passengers followed. A quiet chorus of affirmation. Not angry, just honest. The power wasn't in outrage, it was in unity, in decency. Caleb looked up at his father. "Did we do something wrong?" Marcus knelt down. "No, son, they did." And that moment became the start of something no flight delay ever caused before: accountability. The airline staff moved swiftly now, shifting from defense to damage control. Francis Morales signaled to the captain that the Holloways were to be boarded immediately and seated with full courtesy. A new gate agent arrived, replacing Dorsey, who disappeared behind the jet bridge, her authority quietly revoked. Jason, ever the ghost in the machine, returned to his seat without fanfare. The Holloways walked toward the gate, but this time with dignity. They didn't gloat, didn't boast. Marcus nodded once to Morales in silent thanks, while Denise gently guided Caleb forward. As they passed the boarding tunnel, one of the flight attendants, an older man with graying temples, offered a sincere apology. "On behalf of this crew, welcome aboard. We're glad to have you." Inside the cabin, whispers rippled down the aisles. A few passengers stood to offer the Holloways their seats in first class, but Marcus declined. "We're fine right where we are," he said. "Thank you." Caleb pressed his face to the window as the engines rumbled. He finally allowed himself to smile, feeling safe again. Jason was last to board. No special treatment, no need. But as he passed Morales at the gate, she met his eye. "You have no idea how much trouble this could have been," Jason simply said. "Then it was worth it." She stared after him for a beat before quietly whispering into her radio, "Make sure it's in her file. Full report." The plane taxied to the runway. In the back of the aircraft, Marcus reached for Denise's hand. No words, just understanding. Caleb leaned his head on her shoulder and finally closed his eyes. The flight had been saved. The family restored. But the storm wasn't over. Jason knew. A moment had been won. But the system that created it still stood tall. By the time Flight E-283 landed in Los Angeles, the story had already begun to spread. One of the passengers had taken a discreet photo of the Holloways standing at the gate, tension heavy in their posture. Another had recorded a short video, capturing Marcus asking, "Not until you say why." Within hours, it went viral. Not because of anger, but because of grace under fire. Airline PR moved quickly, issuing a vague apology. But vagueness couldn't silence a nation that saw too clearly. Comment sections buzzed. Forums lit up. People asked the same question. What if Jason hadn't been there? Back in Texas, Gate Agent Dorsey was suspended pending investigation. Internally, though, whispers circulated. Some defended her. Others questioned the Holloways. And a few asked the dangerous question, why is this even news? Jason never responded publicly. He didn't grant interviews. But when Morales called 2 days later to offer a quiet thank you, he said something that stuck. "You don't fix problems by firing one person. You fix them by changing who gets protected when no one's watching." Meanwhile, Marcus faced his own storm. Some callers to his shop hung up when they recognized his name. One client left a nasty voicemail, but more people stopped by to shake his hand, to thank him for holding the line without yelling, to say, "You reminded me what dignity looks like." Denise received messages from other parents. Some had kids who were also stopped. Some had stayed quiet in those moments. But now, seeing her grace, they vowed not to. Even little Caleb, too young to understand the full weight, knew something had happened. "Daddy, we didn't win Disneyland," he said. "We won something else." Marcus nodded. "Yeah, we did, buddy. We won truth." The Holloways thought the story would pass, fade into another headline. But a week later, an invitation came. An internal panel from the Department of Transportation's Office of Civil Rights requested a statement. The story had touched a nerve, and now the government wanted to know if this incident reflected a wider pattern. Marcus hesitated. He wasn't interested in cameras. Denise worried about the impact on their son, but Jason called that evening for the first time since the airport. His voice was calm. "You don't have to do it," he said. "But if you don't, nothing changes." Marcus said nothing for a moment. Then, with quiet resolve, "We'll go." At the panel, Marcus sat in a Navy suit flanked by Denise. They weren't activists. They were parents, citizens. And when Marcus spoke, he didn't talk about race. In abstracts, He told the room what it felt like to hold your son's hand while someone told you, without words, that you didn't belong. Denise followed, measured and strong. She explained the subtle damage, how bias isn't always loud, but it's always corrosive. The panel listened. No interruptions, no questions until the end. Then, one commissioner asked, "What do you want to see happen next?" Marcus paused. "I don't want revenge. I want every family, no matter what they look like, to be treated like they belong in the line." A quiet tear fell down the cheek of one of the secretaries in the back row. She wiped it away quickly. Jason never appeared at the panel. He didn't need to. His part was never the spotlight. It was ensuring the door stayed open. And as the Holloways left that day, reporters waiting outside didn't get sound bites. They got silence and the unmistakable power of a family standing tall. 2 months passed. The world moved on. Stories changed. But at the Dallas-Fort Worth terminal, something different began to take root. Airline policy shifted. New training was rolled out, quietly, without media fanfare. Not the usual checkbox sessions, but immersive programs about unconscious bias and respectful engagement. Frances Morales oversaw it personally. She made sure it stuck. Gate Agent Dorsey was quietly let go, not because of a single mistake, but because she failed to reflect the dignity required of someone who controls who gets on and who doesn't. Marcus received a formal letter of apology, not typed, handwritten, signed by the CEO. He never framed. He tucked it into a drawer. The real reward had already come. At Holloway Auto and Repair, new customers showed up weekly, not out of sympathy, but because word had spread that if you wanted your car fixed by someone who knew what respect looked like, you went to Marcus. Denise was offered a position at the district level to implement inclusivity programs. She accepted, quietly but proudly, and Caleb, he got his Disneyland trip uninterrupted this time. No fanfare, just laughter, sunshine, and ice cream he spilled twice. Jason disappeared back into the wind. No one knew where he went next, but Frances got a package weeks later, a sealed envelope with one simple note: "Keep the door open for the next ones." Inside was a check, anonymous donation, enough to fund training for the next 2 years. The story didn't end in a grand speech or viral documentary. It ended with change. Quiet, persistent change. The kind that grows in the soil of decency. And when passengers now boarded at Gate B-17, they weren't just walking onto a flight. They were stepping into the shadow of a moment where someone, finally, did the right thing. Stories like this don't usually make the front page. There's no explosion. No courtroom drama, no sweeping music cue. But what happened at Gate B-17 mattered, because it was ordinary. It was a moment when a quiet injustice nearly slipped by unnoticed. Almost. But it didn't, because someone saw it. Jason Statham didn't storm a cockpit or confront a villain in a monologue. He didn't need to. His power was presence, observation, and using his name not for glory, but for good. In one call, he stopped a flight. But more importantly, he started a reckoning. Marcus and Denise Holloway didn't fight back with lawsuits or media campaigns. They didn't need to. They had truth on their side. They had composure. And they had each other. And perhaps that's the lesson here. True strength isn't about force. It's about choosing grace when anger is easier. It's about standing your ground without shouting. It's about refusing to move until the truth gets its voice. Caleb may not remember all the headlines, but he'll remember what it looked like when his parents stood tall, when strangers spoke up, when right was quietly, undeniably done. So to everyone watching, ask yourself, when the moment comes, will you see it? Will you speak even when your voice shakes? Or will you, like so many, look away? Because justice doesn't always arrive. Sirens. Sometimes it's a father's hand steady on his son's shoulder, a woman's calm voice asking for accountability. Stranger with a phone and a name that opens doors. Let that be enough. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you've ever stood up, or wished you had, when silence felt safer. The next gate, B17, might be closer than you think.